In my last episode, I had a great conversation with Ingrid Stab about strengths-based leadership and growing through awareness. When you can name what makes you and your people genuinely powerful, you stop trying to control everything, you collaborate more intelligently, and you lead with less stress and more impact. Have you ever watched a smart team work hard and still feel like everything is heavier than it needs to be? Everyone is trying hard, but also forcing themselves into the same, quote, right way to lead and perform. Today, I want to explore what makes people indispensable, build collaboration that actually works, and stop letting stress run the whole show. Hi, I'm Becky. Welcome to Short Story Long. In this podcast, we discuss ways you can integrate who you are into how you lead. Today, I am offering strategies for building your skills as a leader. Let's break down what's important as you gain self-awareness and move that into action. When talking with Ingrid, I thought about how leadership pains get mislabeled. We seek to learn time management, productivity, or motivation tools and techniques, but underneath it is often awareness. Awareness of what's happening in me, awareness of what's happening in you, and awareness of how we're both reacting under pressure. Ingrid's point was that most leaders waste years trying to fix themselves and manage everyone into the same mold. The Enneagram is the vehicle we discussed, and other assessments or tools to create self-awareness are also powerful. The real leadership concept is awareness. Seeing your own patterns under stress, naming your real strengths, and recognizing that people's strengths are often invisible because they come so naturally to them. What stood out is Ingrid's reminder that a lot of leaders are walking around with real strengths that are hidden in plain sight, not because they're a big secret, but because they're easy for them. So they assume everyone can do it and they don't lead from it. Then they wonder why they feel stretched, why their teams feel misaligned, and why collaboration turns into friction. Ingrid also names something I see constantly with capable leaders: the urge to optimize, control, and push when things feel uncertain. It looks responsible, but it can actually narrow your options. Her story about receptive mode made me consider how leadership can improve when you create space and not just urgency. At the beginning is you. So I wonder, what do you know about you? Leaders who can name strengths accurately stop assigning people work based on assumption and start assigning based on actual value. It reduces the frustration in the moment and it raises the confidence of, frankly, everyone around. It makes that performance more sustainable. Ingrid talked about how most people are taking that skill or that strength that they have for granted that makes them as great as they actually are. It's what makes them indispensable, and it makes them magnificent. In my work, I've watched leaders try to get better by copying someone else's style instead of naming what they already do exceptionally well. My perspective is simple. If you don't claim your strengths, you end up working twice as hard to get half the result. Awareness is not navel-gazing. It is leadership efficiency. When I first stepped fully into coaching, I was very aware that I wasn't trying to be a big-name, stage-performing coach. That was never my goal. I didn't want bigger energy. I wanted deeper work. Still, there's subtle pressure in the industry to package everything into frameworks and sound bites. So I experimented with tightening things up to make it more structured and polished. It worked a little bit, but it wasn't me. I'm not about discipline and polish. I'm about owning who you are and moving forward from that place. What I eventually embraced were the strengths I'd been using my whole career: pattern recognition, emotional regulation in the room, and the ability to hear what someone is circling but not yet saying. I'm not the coach who overwhelms you with tools. I'm the one who notices the shift in your tone and asks the one question that makes everything click. That's when the work is powerful for me. So my invitation to you is to really be thinking about what are those things that keep showing up as a pattern for me throughout my life. Often these things start even as a child. You start to see these patterns of things that you're doing. Like I said, mine was that pattern recognition and the ability to hear people for what they weren't really saying. You have those things too, and recognizing what they are and being able to use them as a powerful anchor in your leadership style not only tells you who you are, but it gives you language to explain that to other people. And that matters. Collaboration gets easier when you stop expecting one person to be good at everything, especially when that person is you. A lot of friction on teams comes from invisible expectations. We assume competence should look the same across roles. We assume initiative, communication style, speed, and precision should all show up in equal measure. When they don't, we interpret it as a gap in commitment instead of a difference in wiring. Leaders who build teams around complementary strengths create faster decisions, cleaner handoffs, and a whole lot less resentment. Instead of asking everyone to stretch into mediocrity across the board, those leaders let people operate in areas where they are naturally sharp. The detail-oriented thinker tightens the plan. The big picture strategist frames direction. The relationship builder anticipates impact. And the steady operator ensures consistency. When those differences are acknowledged openly, work stops feeling like constant compensation and starts feeling like contribution. Ingrid talked a little bit about co-writing and co-authoring a book with her hero author. And she talked about what happened was that the two of them really complemented each other. One was more creative, one was more on that consistency side. So when she was talking about collaboration, she was talking about it in a work setting with a team, and it goes beyond her co-authoring. It goes into producing the work that you do on an everyday basis. I've seen this in every role where I was responsible for outcomes and also responsible for people. When I tried to will the result into existence, I became the bottleneck. When I designed collaboration around who was naturally strong at what, the work moved faster and the team had more ownership. To me, collaboration is not a value statement. It's actually a strategy. In my coaching, this shows up very directly for clients. When a client is trying to will the outcome into existence, they actually usually show up pretty exhausted. They're holding every decision and anticipating every risk. They think they're being responsible when they've become the bottleneck or an obstacle. Ouch, that's hard to hear. I don't coach them to delegate more in a generic way. I help them consider the real strengths on their team and who they actually trust. If you can't hand it over with confidence, you aren't seeing the strength that person needs to deliver on the outcomes that you're looking for. Is it that the person doesn't have it? Or is my client maybe looking for the team member to do it like they would? It may mean my client has a conversation with a team member. That conversation can be, hey, I want this outcome. What are the strengths you would tap into to get that done? It can help your employee think about where to start. When they know which skills they need to apply, they can start using that as a framework to get things started. The work then moves faster because it's aligned with natural capability. And their ownership of it increases because people are operating from competence and not compliance. Well, my boss told me I had to do this, so I guess it's what I have to do. Or it's maybe a little bit more resentful than that. Collaboration isn't a soft value. It's an operational strategy. When you stop trying to personally push every result forward and instead architect around strengths, performance improves and pressure drops. And it can also demonstrate to you where some of those skill gaps actually exist. And when you have an opportunity for hiring or for creating development opportunities for your team, then you already know where those gaps are and that you need to fill them in some way. One of the key things that Ingrid and I talked about was receptive leadership. Those leaders who only push, hustle, and optimize narrow their field of vision. When everything becomes a problem to solve or a metric to improve, you start scanning for efficiency instead of possibility, and your questions get tighter, and your timelines way shorter. It can look decisive from the outside, but internally it often feels tense. Receptive leadership is the skill of creating enough space to notice opportunities and relationships you cannot see when you are clenched. It shows up in small ways, leaving room in a conversation instead of filling every silence. Inviting input before finalizing a decision, and resisting the urge to respond immediately when you feel any kind of pressure. It's the discipline of pausing long enough to let new information surface. Ingrid described how she stumbled onto her hero's location late at night. She was in a receptive mode at the time. And she also really was doing a contrast of old versus new approaches, where she talked about a huge shift from thinking she has to optimize everything, plan everything, and strategize, and start to rely on other people. I really saw myself in this. It shows up for me when I'm tempted to solve everything alone, fast and perfectly. I've learned that some of my best outcomes came after I stopped forcing the answer and started creating conditions for a better way to answer to appear, usually through a person, a conversation, or simply a pause and a walk around somewhere. Not so long ago, I was building a new offer and felt the pressure to get it right. My instinct was to lock myself in a room, outline the framework, polish the language, and launch it fully formed. Yeah, that didn't happen. Instead, I shared a rough version with 2 trusted peers and asked them where it didn't land. The conversation reshaped the entire thing. What I would have spent weeks perfecting alone, and let's just say it wouldn't have been perfect, it became stronger in a single afternoon. I didn't force the answer into existence. I created the conditions for a better one to surface, and I trusted my peers not to judge me for bringing a half-baked idea into the room. Receptive does not mean you are being passive. It means you're not gripping the steering wheel and focusing on the license plate in front of you. Instead, you hold the wheel firmly and raise your situational awareness. My money is there are fewer accidents in that second one. There's a lot of stress, and I don't want to minimize that. This idea of focusing in on strengths, I hear some listeners saying, but Becky, speed is of the essence in my organization. I have to go, 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 go. And one of the things that I often find myself saying in those situations is it faster to jump in and do the wrong thing so you have to redo it later? Or is it better to pause first, think it through, and do the right thing first? Stress is not just something you feel internally. It actually quietly shifts how you lead. When you're under stress, your communication changes. Maybe you're tightening timelines because you want progress. Maybe you're over-explaining because you want clarity, so you give it. Probably too much of that in those situations. Other times it is agonizing over tone and outcomes because you want the conversation to land well. Conversely, you may pull back and say less, assuming others already should understand. What once felt collaborative can start to feel tense or distant. Look, the intention is usually about responsibility. You care. You want this to go well. That stress also affects how you interpret what is happening around you. A neutral delay can start to feel like resistance. Ambiguity can feel like incompetence. And your brain looks for control and it fills in gaps with threat. If you do not recognize your own stress pattern, you will unintentionally pass it on. Your team will absorb the urgency or tension, even if you never say a word. It's written on your face and speaks from the messages you send. Ingrid talked about herself in this scenario, so she talked about, when I'm under stress at work, I go to that place. And I think we probably know what that place is. And she described herself as being extremely critical of other people in those moments. I tend to share this critical under stress characteristic. Stress rarely announces itself as stress. It dresses up pretty as efficiency, speed, and quality. And here's the part we miss. When you navigate leading with your flavor of stress, the other person feels it. They may see the stress and try to understand. They definitely experience it as pressure. Stress behavior is contagious. Even when it is wrapped in competence and good intention, it shifts the emotional temperature. The more authority you hold, the more amplified that effect becomes. But don't stress. It doesn't need to be impossible to navigate. In coaching, for me, this can show up in really subtle ways. If a client is stuck and I can feel the clock ticking, my stress can go up. I might consider steering the conversation toward what seems like the cleanest, most efficient outcome. My intentions are good. I want momentum for them. The thing is, I've learned that when I do that, the energy shifts. The client can start answering in a way that satisfies me instead of thinking freely. It becomes less exploration and more performance. That has actually been a flag to my own awareness in those moments. So now, when I notice that tightening in myself, I slow down. I say less. I ask one clean question and let the silence work. That shift protects the coaching space, and the most important thing is my client choosing where to go next. As a leader, these same techniques are powerful. Slow, say less, ask questions, and let silence do the work. You don't always need to know their next step or the path forward. If you are the person who is normally holding back, there's just a slight tweak I'd offer. Go back to the core question like, what feels like a roadblock you are facing right now in this? Ask them where they are stuck. They may surprise you and release some of that stress you are holding. No matter what, it eliminates the assumptions you are making since you have asked them to actually tell you. Maybe you're looking for additional ways to integrate more self-awareness into your leadership style. So naturally, here's your skill builder challenge if you choose to accept it. I invite you to pick one project that feels heavier than it should. Identify one task you're forcing through willpower. Take a minute. Take a minute to recognize that impulse, to force it, and seek an alternative. Consider how you might reassign or restructure it around someone else's natural strength, or pair two people whose strengths complement each other. Sure, maybe you still need to be in the mix, so collaborate and share the weight of the task. Naturally, I'd love to hear how this challenge goes for you, so send an email or reach out in some other way. When you know your strengths, you stop wasting energy. You no longer try to be someone you admire but are not. You begin to notice where you are strongest and where you are overcompensating. That alone lowers your stress level because you are no longer fighting yourself while trying to lead others. At the same time, you start to see your people more clearly. You become more receptive to how the work actually gets done, not just how you would get it done. You notice who naturally brings momentum, who sees risk early, who builds trust without effort. And instead of gripping the steering wheel tighter, you design the work around that mix of strengths. When you lead that way, the pressure in the system drops. People feel trusted instead of managed. You feel supported instead of solely responsible. The work moves because it is aligned with real capability, not forced through willpower. Thanks for listening. If you found this episode helpful, share it with someone who could benefit from it. Until next time, I'm Becky Fraser, reminding you to integrate who you are with how you lead. Okay, bye.